The Frosty Fairy Queen's Garden and Little Elif's Warm Heart. Once upon a time, there was a distant land where the colors of the rainbow never faded, butterflies fluttered all year long, and bird songs never ceased. In the middle of this land stood an old, grand castle, surrounded by mist. Inside the castle lived a beautiful but always a little sad fairy named Periliche, Fairy Queen. The Fairy Queen's heart was full of love, but her beloved garden, for some reason, always remained frozen and icy. No matter how hard she tried, no flowers would bloom in her garden, and no leaves would turn green. That's why the Fairy Queen was always alone. Far from the castle, at the foot of lush green hills, there was a charming village called Gülşenköy, Rose Garden Village. In Gülşenköy, there lived a little girl named Elif, whose eyes smiled, whose hair danced in the wind, who was very cheerful, but sometimes a little mischievous. Elif was curious about everything and loved to explore new places. One morning, as Elif was playing with her friend Kerem's ball rolled into the forbidden garden of the castle. The garden looked mysterious and a little scary, hidden in the mist. No one dared to go near it. "Oh no, our ball ran away," said Kerem. "What do we do now?" Elif hesitated a little. "No one can go in there," she said, but she loved her ball very much. Elif carefully tried to sneak under the forbidden garden's fence. Just then, her foot tripped and she tumbled, falling right into the garden. When Elif fell into the garden, she was surprised by the huge frozen trees, ice-covered leaves, and a garden with no blooming flowers. The air was very cold. As Elif searched for her ball among the frozen trees, she didn't notice the sad Fairy Queen watching her from the castle window. Elif found her ball but couldn't get out. Just then, next to a frozen rosebush, she saw a tiny, shivering sparrow that was cold. The sparrow's wing was frozen. Elif's heart ached. She forgot about getting her ball. She put her mischievousness aside. She slowly approached the sparrow and gently touched its tiny frozen wing. She took off her own scarf and covered the sparrow with it. Elif's warm hand and the softness of her scarf warmed the sparrow's frozen wing. The sparrow gently rubbed its tiny beak against Elif's finger. Elif smiled at the sparrow. At that moment, a tiny pink bud appeared on the frozen rosebush. The Fairy Queen had watched everything from the castle window. When she saw Elif's kindness to the sparrow, a warm feeling spread through her heart. For the first time, a bud had appeared in her garden. The Fairy Queen opened the window in surprise and glided out. Elif was a little scared when she saw the Fairy Queen. The Fairy Queen was very beautiful, but her eyes were still sad. Are you the Fairy Queen?" Elif whispered. The Fairy Queen came close to Elif. "Why did you enter my garden, little girl?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Elif pointed to the frozen sparrow. "This sparrow was cold. I wanted to help it." The Fairy Queen looked at the rosebud. Elif's warm heart had begun to melt the ice in her garden. The Fairy Queen slowly extended her hand and held Elif's hand. Elif's warm hand warmed the Fairy Queen's cold fingers. At that moment, the ice throughout the garden began to melt. Trees turned green, flowers bloomed, and snowflakes gave way to colorful leaves. The garden instantly became lush green and vibrant. Kerem couldn't believe the sight he saw from the other side of the fence. The garden had suddenly regained its former beauty. The Fairy Queen smiled at Elif. "Your warm heart has warmed my frozen garden, little Elif. The greatest magic is love and kindness. You taught me this." From that day on, the Fairy Queen was no longer alone. The children of Gülşenköy, Elif, and Kerem frequently visited the Fairy Queen and played games with her in the garden. The Fairy Queen would tell them old fairy tales, and Elif would teach her how to plant new flowers. The garden became the garden of love, not just for the Fairy Queen, but for the entire village. Everyone in Gülşenköy talked about how little Elif's kindness had warmed the Fairy Queen's frozen garden. And this story taught them that even a small act of kindness can melt the biggest ice, warm the saddest hearts, and that friendship can blossom strongly even in unexpected places.